Nyla Carter's face hit the pavement hard, the rough gravel scraping her cheek. A sharp knee dug into her spine, pinning her down. Zip ties cinched around her wrists, biting into her skin. "You just made this harder on yourself," a gruff voice sneered above her. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay calm. These men had no idea who they were dealing with. No idea that the so-called helpless black woman they just dragged off her own porch was the wrong woman to mess with. "You're trespassing," the man continued. "And the HOA doesn't tolerate loiterers." "Trespassing? On my own damn property?" Nyla twisted her head enough to glance up. The one on top of her was a brute, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, and sweating through his cheap, knockoff security uniform. The other, wiry and fidgety, stood nearby, one hand on a radio clipped to his vest. "This doesn't have to be difficult, lady," the wiry one said. "You cooperate, and we won't have a problem." She clenched her jaw. Cooperate? She had been minding her business, sitting on her own damn porch, when these clowns stormed up, flashing fake badges and shouting about violations and removing trespassers. "Let me go," Nyla ordered, her voice ice cold. "Now," Brute chuckled. "You ain't in a position to be giving orders." The wiry man nodded toward her house. Neighbors called in reports of suspicious activity. "We're within our rights to remove any unauthorized persons." "Unauthorized?" Nyla's muscles tensed. "This is my house." "Oh yeah." Brute yanked her up by the arms, forcing her to her knees. "Then where's your proof?" Nyla inhaled slowly, keeping her composure. If she played her cards right, she could dismantle this entire situation before things got out of hand. But then a new voice cut through the tension. "What's taking so damn long?" A third man strode up, his presence radiating authority. Older, stocky, a real firearm resting on his hip, not like the cheap stun guns the other two carried. His uniform bore an HOA Security Task Force patch, but Nyla knew damn well these men had no legal power. And yet, he smirked down at her like she was already in cuffs. "Having trouble handling one woman?" he mocked. Brute chuckled. "She's got some fight in her." The leader rolled his eyes and pulled out a piece of paper. "Nyla Carter, correct?" Her stomach tightened. "How did he know my name?" "I'd say you're in a lot of trouble," he continued. "Failure to comply with HOA regulations. Unlawful residence in a restricted area. And most importantly," he squatted down, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper, "we don't tolerate people like you around here." A slow, simmering rage built inside Nyla. She knew exactly what he meant. She could handle their petty power trip. She could even handle their pathetic attempt at intimidation. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't some helpless victim. She wasn't some pushover they could bully into submission. She was CIA, and she was already 3 steps ahead of them. "You're making a mistake," she said evenly, meeting his gaze. "A very big mistake." The leader scoffed. "That's so." He straightened and unsnapped his holster. "Then by all means, educate me." Nyla's pulse remained steady, but her mind was already running through every possible move. She could take out the wiry one first, disarm the radio. Then Brute, use his own weight against him. The leader was the only true threat, but she had backup. Because while these fools thought they had control, she had already activated her emergency distress signal. And they were running out of time. "All right," she said, feigning submission. "You win." Brute yanked her to her feet, his grip rough. Smart choice. Then in the distance, sirens. Loud. Approaching fast. The leader's smirk twitched. "What the hell?" Nyla smiled. "That's the sound of your problem getting a whole lot bigger." The first patrol car screeched around the corner, followed by 2 black SUVs. The HOA cops exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier arrogance slipping away. The wiry one fumbled for his radio. "Boss, we..." "Shut up," the leader snapped. He turned back to Nyla, gripping her jaw. "What the hell did you do?" Her eyes burned with quiet defiance. "You really should have done your homework." The vehicle skidded to a stop, and the doors burst open. Men in suits, tactical gear, and one man in particular, stepping forward with a deadly calm expression. "Agent Carter," he called. "Are you all right?" The leader's face drained of color. "Agent." Brute stumbled back. "Oh, we're screwed." Nyla yanked free of the leader's grip, rolling her shoulders as she stepped forward. The tables had turned. "Yes, you are," she said coolly. Nyla felt the shift in energy the moment the sirens blared through the neighborhood. The so-called officers, 3 men playing dress-up in fake HOA uniforms, exchanged looks of confusion, their arrogance flickering into something else. Uncertainty. Panic. She smiled. You hear that? She taunted, tilting her head toward the sound. That's for me. The leader, the one with the gut and the real firearm, stepped forward, jamming the barrel of his pistol against her temple. Shut up, he growled. I don't know who you think you are, but this doesn't end well for you. You're right, she said calmly. It ends terribly for you. She saw it before he did, the red dots appearing on his chest one by one. A dozen little warnings. He was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. The tactical team had arrived. The moment the first black-clad figure emerged from the shadows, everything exploded into chaos. Drop your weapon, a voice thundered through a megaphone. Hands in the air, now. The leader barely had time to react before a flashbang exploded behind them, sending him stumbling. Nyla used the distraction. With practiced precision, she twisted, shoving her weight backward, knocking the man off balance. His grip on the gun faltered, and she struck, an elbow to the ribs, a stomp to his foot. He howled in pain, his weapon skittering across the pavement. Bulldozer and Twitchy panicked. Bulldozer reached for his belt, but he was too slow. A black-clad agent tackled him to the ground, knee to his spine, twisting his arms behind him. Twitchy turned to run, only to be met with a stun baton to the gut. He collapsed, twitching, gasping for air. Within seconds, it was over. Nyla rolled her shoulders as the zip ties around her wrists were cut away. She turned to the tactical team's commander, a woman in dark gear with a sharp gaze. Took you long enough, Nyla said, rubbing her wrists. The commander smirked. You had it handled. She glanced down at the three groaning men on the pavement. You sure these idiots are the only ones? Nyla's expression darkened. For now, but I guarantee they're not working alone. The leader of the fake cops, now handcuffed and pinned to the pavement, snarled. You think this is over? You think you can just... Nyla crouched beside him, her voice quiet but lethal. I know it's over for you. But your little operation? That's what I'm going to burn to the ground. The man's eyes flickered with something close to fear. You don't know who you're messing with. She leaned in, her lips curling. Neither do you. She stood, turning back to the commander. Get them processed. I have somewhere to be. The commander hesitated. You sure? This was clearly a targeted move. Someone wanted you out of the picture. I know, Nyla said, which is exactly why I need to go hunting. Hours later, Nyla sat in a dimly lit bar downtown, nursing a glass of whiskey she barely touched. The encounter still burned in her veins, but it wasn't the fight itself that kept her on edge. It was the bigger question. Who sent them? These weren't just some random racists playing enforcers. This was organized, coordinated. Someone had orchestrated that ambush, knowing exactly who she was, or at least, who they thought she was. And that meant there was more going on than she initially suspected. A shadow fell over her table. Didn't expect to see you drinking alone. She didn't look up. I could say the same for you, Miller. The man slid into the seat across from her. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but the way he carried himself screamed military. Special ops. Someone who had seen too much, done too much, and yet somehow kept his soul intact. Heard about what happened, he said, his voice low. That was sloppy. Too public. Not your style. It wasn't my plan, Nyla muttered, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. They came for me, and they weren't amateurs. Miller frowned. You think they were sent? I know they were sent. I just don't know by who. Miller exhaled sharply, running a hand over his beard. If they're bold enough to snatch you off your own porch, this isn't just some neighborhood power play. This is bigger. Which means I need to move first, Nyla said, finally looking up. I need intel. And I need it now. Miller studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I might know a guy, but you're not gonna like where this leads. Nyla smirked. When do I ever? Miller slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Address. Meet him at midnight. Don't go in armed. He spooks easy. She picked up the note, glancing at the scribbled location. Her stomach clenched. She knew that place, and it was the last place she wanted to go. Miller watched her reaction carefully. You still sure about this? Nyla clenched her jaw, stuffing the paper into her pocket. I don't have a choice. Midnight couldn't come soon enough. Nyla's pulse remained steady, even as the so-called officers struggled to maintain their composure. The sound of sirens grew louder, closer, until red and blue lights flashed against the houses lining the street. Neighbors peeked through their windows, some bold enough to step outside with their phones recording. The leader of the fake HOA cops, the one with the gut pressing against his belt, exchanged frantic glances with his men. He gritted his teeth. Get her in the car. Now! Twitchy grabbed Nyla's arm roughly, but she didn't resist. Not yet. She let them drag her a few feet before she heard the tires screeching to a halt. Multiple vehicles. More than just a few units. They weren't ready for this. Neither was she, because the first person stepping out of an unmarked black SUV wasn't just a regular officer. It was him, Special Agent Daniel Briggs. He adjusted his suit jacket with precise control, his eyes masked behind dark aviators. A dozen federal agents followed behind him, moving with quiet authority. The local police that had just arrived took a hesitant step back, realizing this was way beyond their jurisdiction now. Briggs' voice was cold, controlled. Let her go. The leader of the fake HOA cops raised his hands, trying to play it cool. Officer, this is just a misunderstanding. That's Special Agent to you. Briggs' voice cut through the night like a blade. And that's not just any woman you just assaulted. That's Nyla Carter, CIA. The leader blanched, his face draining of all color. The grip on Nyla's arms loosened ever so slightly. Twitchy's mouth opened, then closed, his fingers twitching as if debating whether to reach for his weapon. Nyla smiled, the kind of smile that sent chills down a person's spine. I warned you, she said, her voice smooth. You really should have done your homework. Briggs took a step forward. On the ground, hands where I can see them. Now! For a moment, it looked like they might comply. The leader swallowed hard, his mind scrambling for a way out. But then Nyla saw it, the subtle flicker of his eyes toward his men. A signal. Everything happened in an instant. The leader lunged, reaching for his gun. Twitchy yanked Nyla back, using her as a shield. Bulldozer dove for the car, reaching inside for something. A deafening bang echoed through the night. Nyla felt the grip on her tighten, then loosened just as quickly as Twitchy's body went limp. He collapsed beside her, a single bullet hole between his eyes. Briggs was already moving. Shots fired. Take them down. Chaos erupted. The remaining fake cops scrambled, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Federal agents swarmed in like a well-trained pack of wolves, taking them down with swift efficiency. The leader fired once, twice, both shots missing, before he was tackled to the pavement. Nyla exhaled slowly, rubbing at her wrists as another agent freed her from the zip ties. Her pulse was still steady, her mind calculating. This wasn't over. Briggs approached, his eyes scanning her for any injuries. You all right? Nyla nodded. I'm fine, but I want answers. Briggs gestured toward the leader, now cuffed and face down on the pavement. We'll get them. But Nyla wasn't so sure. This had been too sloppy, too reckless. If these guys were just some random power-tripping frauds, why go to these lengths? Why risk pulling a gun on federal agents? Unless they had no choice. The leader lifted his head, his lips split from the takedown. He looked at Nyla then, really looked at her, and in that moment, she saw something she didn't expect. Panic. Not the panic of a man about to go to prison. The panic of a man who knew something worse was coming. Nyla crouched beside him. Who sent you? He swallowed hard. His gaze flickered past her towards something, or someone she couldn't see. And then he said the last thing she expected. You think we're the bad guys? Lady, you have no idea who you just pissed off. Before Nyla could press further, an explosion rocked the street. The officers barely had time to react before the front door burst open. A black-clad figure moved like a shadow, precise and swift. In a matter of seconds, Twitchy was disarmed, his gun sliding across the pavement. Bulldozer swung, but the figure sidestepped effortlessly, slamming a knee into his gut before twisting his arm behind his back. He howled in pain as he collapsed onto the ground. Nyla allowed herself a small smirk. Right on time. The leader, still reeling from the shock, stumbled backward, his hands trembling as he reached for his weapon. Who the hell? You're surrounded, the figure said coldly. Drop it. He hesitated, glancing around. More dark figures emerged from the shadows, silent, efficient, and deadly. His grip loosened. Nyla stepped forward, shaking off the pain in her wrists. I warned you, she said, her voice like ice. You should have done your homework. The leader's jaw tightened. This isn't over. She tilted her head. Oh, I think it is. But before she could issue another word, a sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The night was illuminated by a blinding fireball as a nearby vehicle erupted into flames. Chaos. Screams filled the air as the fake officers seized their chance. The leader lunged for Twitchy, yanking him to his feet. Move. Now! Through the smoke and the confusion, Nyla watched as they disappeared into the darkness. Her backup started after them, but she raised a hand. "No," she said. "Let them go." One of her team members, a tall woman with sharp eyes, turned to her. "Are you sure?" Nyla nodded. "They'll lead us to the real threat." As sirens grew louder in the distance, she turned to face the burning wreckage. This was bigger than just some wannabe vigilantes in fake uniforms. Someone else was pulling the strings, and she was going to find out who. Nyla's eyes narrowed as she watched the last remnants of smoke curl into the night sky. The fake officers had disappeared into the darkness, but she knew their escape wouldn't last long. Her backup team had already melted into the shadows, tracking their every move. This wasn't just a random act of aggression. Someone had sent them. Someone with power. She tapped the communicator in her ear. "I want all eyes on them. No interference yet. Let's see where they run." "Copy that," a voice responded. "We've got them." Nyla turned back toward her house. The wreckage from the explosion still smoldered, casting an eerie glow on the porch where just moments ago she had been dragged off like a common criminal. Her jaw clenched. These men had walked onto her property thinking they were in control. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Just as she was about to step inside, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A restricted number. She answered. "Who is this?" A distorted voice crackled through the line. "You should have stayed down, Agent Cade." Nyla's breath stilled. No one had used that name in years. Not since she left active field duty and disappeared into civilian life. "And you should have done your research," she countered, masking the slight unease creeping down her spine. A low chuckle. "Oh, we did. That's why we're just getting started." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Nyla lowered the phone, gripping it tightly. This wasn't some rogue group playing pretend. This was organized, calculated. And whoever they weren't finished. Her communicator crackled again. "We have a location," her team member reported. "They've regrouped in an abandoned warehouse on the east side. Do we move in?" Nyla exhaled slowly, her mind already forming the next steps. "Not yet," she said. "We do this on my terms. Because if they thought they had the upper hand, they were about to learn the hard way." No one hunted Nyla Cade and lived to tell the tale. The air inside the abandoned warehouse was thick with tension. The fake HOA cops, now unmasked as mercenaries, paced anxiously, their stolen uniforms discarded in a pile. They had been played, hunted, and now the walls were closing in. "This wasn't supposed to go like this," one of them hissed, gripping his gun tighter. "We were told she was just some stubborn homeowner." "Who told you that?" A voice echoed from the shadows. The room went deathly silent. Nyla Cade stepped forward, her boots clicking against the cold concrete floor. The glow of a single hanging light flickered, casting ominous shadows across her face. She was calm, composed, but her eyes burned with an unshakable intensity. What do you want?" the leader stammered, sweat forming at his brow. "Money? A deal?" Nyla smirked. "I want you to understand something," she said, her voice steady. "You walked onto my property. You put your hands on me. You thought you were in control." She took another step forward. "But the moment you crossed that line, you became my mission." Suddenly, the doors burst open. Armed agents in full tactical gear swarmed in, weapons drawn. Red laser sights danced across the mercenaries' chests. It was over before it even started. One by one, they dropped their weapons, knowing resistance was futile. The leader, shaking, turned back to Nyla. "Please, we didn't know who you were. We were just following orders." Nyla leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's your problem. You followed orders from someone who never expected me to fight back. Now tell me, who sent you?" The man swallowed hard. It was. Before he could finish, a single gunshot rang out from the rafters. His body slumped to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Chaos erupted as Nyla's team scanned the ceiling for the sniper, but it was too late. The assassin had already vanished. Nyla clenched her jaw. Whoever was pulling the strings wasn't done yet. One of her agents approached. "Ma'am, we secured the others." "What now?" Nyla exhaled, her mind racing. "Now, we send a message." She turned to the remaining mercenaries. "Tell whoever sent you that if they want a war, they've got one. And next time, they better send someone who knows what they're doing." With that, she walked out, leaving them to be dragged away by federal agents. As she stepped into the night air, the weight of what had just happened settled on her shoulders. This wasn't over. It was just beginning, because the next time someone tried to come for her, she wouldn't just have backup in place. Did you enjoy this gripping story? If you want more powerful narratives like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts below. What would you have done in this situation? Stay tuned for more eye-opening stories that challenge injustice and celebrate triumph.